To Atlantic Journeys. We already looked at this picture in the slide deck, um, but it's an interesting picture we'll look at in more depth. A reminder that all the vocabulary words are circled in pink. If you aren't sure what a sentence means, you should pause and look it up on your knowledge organizer, or not your knowledge organizer, your vocabulary list. Chapter 3, The Tobacco Coast. Earthworms did not exist in much of North America before 1492. In New England and the upper Midwest, for example, the last ice age had wiped them out. After the ice melted, worms from the south had not moved north because earthworms do not travel long distances unless carried by humans. When Europeans unknowingly introduced two species of earthworms, the common nightcrawler and the red marshworm, they dramatically changed the North American forest ecosystem. In worm-free woodlands, leaves pile up on the forest floor. When earthworms are introduced, they chew through this leaf litter in months, packing its nutrients into the soil in the form of their waste. Trees and shrubs that depend in leaf litter begin to die off. In the Bosque, we have more of the situation just because it's so dry. Sometimes we don't have earthworms, and you can see so much of that leaf. So at the end of every page, I'm going to ask you to pause and take a minute to read my annotations, because it's just a summarization of what I just read. So go ahead and pause it and read these annotations. Here's a picture of a boy picking cotton. And the forest becomes drier and more open. Earthworms compete for food with small insects and drive down their numbers. The birds and lizards and mammals that feed off these small insects in the leaf litter decline too. Where did the nightcrawler, that's another word for earthworms, and marshworm first squirm into American soil? Possibly in the Jamestown colony in Virginia, kicking off what one worm researcher, can you imagine that job, being a worm researcher, calls a, quote, gigantic, unplanned ecological experiment, unquote. 400 years in the making. Romantic tales surround Jamestown. The most famous story tells of how the Indian maiden Pocahontas saved the life of John Smith, one of the leaders of the Jamestown colony. Most of the researchers today believe that story to be untrue. Less well known is the fact that, although Smith and other brave adventurers were vital to the success of Jamestown, the colony was founded as a business venture, not a base for exploration or heroic deeds. Like La Isabela in the Caribbean, Jamestown was supposed to be a trading post. The first permanent English colony in North America was an attempt by merchants to snatch up vast stores of silver and gold they imagined. I'm going to pause there. Take a pause. Pause this video and read my annotations. I'm going to go back and just read this sentence real quick. The first permanent English colony in North America was an attempt by merchants to snatch up vast stores of silver and gold they imagined existed around Jamestown in the big, shallow Chesapeake Bay. Equally important, the merchants wanted to find a route through North America, which they imagined was only a few hundred miles wide, less than a month's journey. When they came to the Pacific coast, they would sail to China, which was the colony's ultimate reason for existence. That means it's a big reason to exist. Jamestown founders intended to bring isolated Virginia into the world market, to globalize it and give England a share of the China trade. The merchants behind the Virginia colony were wrong about silver and gold. They were also wrong about the easy route to China. They did not realize that 3,000 miles of forests, prairies, deserts, and mountains lay between Jamestown and the Pacific. Purely as a business venture, Jamestown was a disaster. Yet the colony left a big mark. Note that starred. It launched the great struggles over democracy and slavery that would be important in the future of the United States. Mark this in your head, in your notes. This is the big deal about Jamestown right here. And of course, we'll find out more. The Jamestown colony was also the beginning of the Columbian Exchange in English America. In biological terms, the colony marks the point when before turns to after. So this is just like Columbus, when things change. So when like the forest no longer has things that aren't earthworms but becomes earthworms. So take a minute, pause right here on page 58 and read through the annotations. Read through the annotations right here to kind of recap what you just read, unpause it, and start listening again. Setting up camp on the marshy Jamestown Peninsula, the colonists were bringing a new age of global interconnectedness to North America without realizing it. Jamestown was a brush fire in a planetary ecological firestorm. The earthworms were just the beginning. Oh, and I think my little drawing there is cute of the earthworm. A risky venture. La Isabela, Columbus's doomed first attempt to establish a trading post in the Caribbean, had been funded and controlled by the Spanish monarchy. Jamestown was different. It was a private business sponsored by a group of people with money and political connections who formed the Virginia Company, pooling their resources to pay for commercial venture and the return for shares of the profit. Jamestown was founded in this way because England's rulers, Queen Elizabeth I and King James I, who followed Elizabeth on the throne, wanted the benefits of trade and conquest but couldn't pay for them. Nor could the monarchs borrow the necessary cash because moneylenders' interest rates were ruinously high. What this means right here is that when people, see where it's underlined? Moneylenders' interest rates were ruinously high. When people lend people money, like a bank lends somebody money, they want to make money off it. That's why they do it. They don't do it because they're nice. So they charge people money. It's an interest. It's like a percentage of what they borrow. They have to pay an extra amount. True, kings and queens had the power to force loans from their subjects, but that practice was deeply unpopular. Okay, pause, read the annotations, and continue listening. It would be sure to create discontent among the people. Was the gamble of the American colony worth it? Elizabeth and James came to the conclusion, no. Colonization was risky. The English faced the additional danger that most of the Americas was already claimed by Spain. Hostility between the two nations was intense. After Elizabeth died in 1603, James lowered the tension, but he knew that an English colony in North America would rekindle the conflict. Spain had already planted a string of small colonies and missions on the Atlantic coast. One was just miles away from Jamestown's future location. It failed. If it weren't enough, France had also claimed North America. Still, the English monarchs were unwilling to give up the Americas to their competition. They had seen how richly Spain was rewarded with the silver of Mexico and South America. Also, there was an opportunity in North America, or so people thought. Many powerful Londoners believed that a watery channel cut across North America and would be impossible to sail through to what is now. Go ahead and pause and read the annotations, please. It would be possible to sail through what is now the United States to reach the Pacific Ocean and China on the other side. Elizabeth and James therefore turned the task and risk of establishing a North America colony over to the Virginia Company, whose 3 small ships set sail from London to Virginia in 1606. Strange land. On May 14th, 1607, we're going to put that in our timeline, the ships anchored in the James River. In movies and textbooks, the Jamestown colonists are often showed arriving in a pristine forest of ancient trees with small bands of Indians gliding like silent ghosts beneath the canopy. This image sees the colonists as, quote, settlers, unquote, in a empty land. In fact, the English ships landed in the middle of a small but rapid growing Indian empire called Sinacomico. 30 years before, Sinacomico had been 6 small, separate clusters of villages. By the time the foreigners had come from overseas, the ruler, Powhatan, had tripled its area. Dozens of villages scattered through the forest east of Chesapeake Bay scattered through the forest east of Chesapeake Bay, housed more than 14,000 people. One historic geographer believes that Sinacomico, go ahead and pause and read these before you go to the next page, that Sinacomico may have had a larger, here's a picture, population in 1600 than the equal-sized areas of Western Europe. Powhatan's people, the Powhatan Indians, as the newcomers called them, lived in settlements of a few hundred people surrounded by fields where corn, beans, squash, and melons were grown together. No fences protected these mixed fields because the Powhatan had no livestock to protect their crops from. The Americas, by quirk of biological history, had a few animals that could be domesticated. Instead, the Indians scattered their farm plots within larger cleared areas where they gathered useful wild plants such as grains, edible greens, and medicinal herbs. The English did not understand that these areas for gathering were useful. From their point of view, the Powhatan landscape was a bewildering jumble of, quote, unused, unquote, land and unfenced, messy farms. To the English, well-kept fences and neat plantings of single-crop signs were a sign of civilization. It seemed to them that the Indians did not truly occupy the land because they had not improved it in the English style. Go ahead and take a second to read the pause at this page. Take a second and read the annotations, please. The land around Chesapeake Bay was a patchwork of bogs and marshes, grassy ponds, and slow-moving streams and meadows that flooded in certain seasons. This soggy landscape, which was unfamiliar to the English, had been shaped by the dam-building American beaver, whose construction turned streams into ponds and wetlands, smearing water across the landscape. Surrounding the cleared areas and the marshes was the forest. Unlike the English forest reserves, which were kept mostly wild, the Chesapeake forest had been shaped by Indian fires. Every fall, the underbrush was burned so that the tender new growth would attract deer. Remember the Haudenosaunee? Same thing. Because this burning killed brush and young trees, the forest that the English colonists encountered was a soaring woodlands of huge, widely spaced trees, a beautiful sight, but just as artificial as the burned-off clearings where the corn was planted. Like the English countryside that the colonists had left behind, Chesapeake Bay had been made by its inhabitants into a working landscape. Just as the tidy checkerboard of fenced fields was essential for English culture, the crazy quilt patchwork of ecological zones in coastal Virginia was essential to the Powhatan way of life. Go ahead and pause and read these annotations. Yet the English newcomers only saw a random snarl of marshes, beaver ponds, unkempt fills, and hostile forests. If the English wanted to live and prosper in new land in the way that they were used to, they would have to change into something more suitable. All the land along the James River was already occupied by Indian villages. The Virginia Company had to plant its colony on a peninsula that no one else wanted. The site was boggy and mosquito-ridden. The river fell so low in late summer that the water was stagnant, contaminated by salt water from the bay. The English wound up drinking the foulest water in the James River, quote, full of slime and filth, unquote. That's gross, complained one colonist. Bad water may have led to a variety of diseases. 8 months after landing, only 38 of more than 100 English colonists had come to shore as Jamestown were left alive. That's a lot. That's a lot. There's some math right there for you. 38 out of 62. So it's about a little less than 40% survived. Although it was 104, so it's probably just about 40% survived, actually. So anyway, back to the book. The colony's desperation was its salvation. Powhatan could not bring himself to regard the starving strangers as a threat. He was certain that he could get rid of the English newcomers at any time, so he let them occupy their not so valuable real estate. He sold them grain as long as they provided trade goods such as guns, axes, knives, mirrors, glass beads, and sheets of copper. New shiploads of colonists arrived, but soon violence broke out between the English and the Indians, and the Powhatan stopped providing the colony with food. The English had stockpiled no supplies and were reduced to eating, quote, dogs, cats, rats, and mice, unquote, and the corpses of the dead. By the spring of 1610, only about 60 colonists had survived what was called the, quote, starving time, unquote. Just as the survivors were about to abandon the colony, more shiploads of colonists and supplies arrived. Year after year, the Virginia Company spent large sums to send colonists to Virginia, more than 100 shiploads in total. Year after year, most would-be settlers died within weeks or months. Even after the first hope of finding precious metals and a route to Asia did not pan out, why did the company keep sending the ship after doomed ship? Equally puzzling, why did Powhatan let the colony survive? Part of the answer to both questions is the Columbian Exchange. Pause right here, read these annotations, and we're going to go back. Maybe you haven't read those annotations. You should. We're going to go back. We're going to look at this, these two maps here. They're also in the slide deck, so we'll take a closer look on the slide deck. You can do that anytime you want. So here's one map, and within the dotted line, this is Sinacomico and the Powhatan nation, and in the middle is Jamestown. And then there's like this little European village, and then the Indian leader's residence, and then the Indian group just gets a dot. I have a lot of questions about this map. One is, why is the Indian village just a dot, but the European village is big and fancy, especially since there was only 40 people, and this is like, what, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, so it's kind of interesting. And we'll look at that map in more detail and have a discussion. And here it is again, fancy European village, Indian village. And we can't really see it here, so I'll show you, but they do it here again. And then this graph is super fascinating. So take a look at this graph. This is how many people over 16 years died and how many survived. We'll take a longer look at that. And that is the end of the beginning of chapter 3.